Good evening. We begin tonight with breaking developments in one of the most delicate diplomatic relationships on the planet. Just yesterday, President Donald Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping engaged in what both sides are calling a significant phone conversation. But beneath the diplomatic pleasantries lies a stark warning from Beijing about an issue that could reshape global politics: Taiwan. To understand why this call matters, we need to step back for a moment. Taiwan has been the third rail of U.S.-China relations for decades. It's a self-governing island that China claims as its own territory, while the United States maintains what's called strategic ambiguity, neither confirming nor denying whether it would defend Taiwan militarily if China were to invade. But here's what makes this moment different. According to readouts from both governments, Xi Jinping didn't mince words. He told President Trump that Taiwan is the most important issue between their two nations. Not trade, not technology competition, not the South China Sea, Taiwan. Xi's message was crystal clear. Beijing will never allow Taiwan to be separated from China. Never. That's not diplomatic language. That's a red line being drawn in real time. Now, what prompted this pointed message? Context matters here. Just weeks before this phone call in December, the United States approved arms sales to Taiwan worth more than $11 billion. Let me repeat that. $11 billion. That's one of the largest weapons packages the U.S. has ever provided to the island. We're talking about advanced missile systems, radar equipment, and defensive capabilities that would make any potential Chinese military action significantly more costly. From Washington's perspective, this is about helping Taiwan defend itself. From Beijing's perspective, this is the United States arming what China considers its own territory. So when Xi urged Trump to handle arms sales to Taiwan with what he called extreme caution, he wasn't making a casual request. This was a warning. The subtext is unmistakable. Continued weapons sales could push U.S.-China relations into dangerous territory. But here's where the story gets even more interesting. Despite this very firm warning about Taiwan, both leaders described the call as positive. Trump characterized it as excellent and said his personal relationship with Xi is extremely good. So what are we to make of this? How can a conversation that includes such a stark warning also be described as excellent? Welcome to the complex world of great power diplomacy, where threats and reassurances often exist side by side. The phone call wasn't only about Taiwan. The two leaders discussed a range of issues that will define their relationship going forward. Trade was on the agenda, specifically China potentially purchasing more American soybeans. There were conversations about Iran's nuclear program, about Russia's ongoing war in Ukraine, and about Trump's planned visit to China in April. This multifaceted discussion reveals something important about how both leaders are approaching their relationship. They're trying to compartmentalize, to find areas where they can cooperate even while they clash on fundamental issues like Taiwan. But here's the question that keeps foreign policy experts up at night. Can you really compartmentalize when it comes to Taiwan? Can you negotiate trade deals and coordinate on Iran while fundamentally disagreeing about an issue that both sides have identified as potentially worth going to war over? Taiwan itself isn't sitting quietly through all of this. President Lai Ching-te responded to news of the Xi-Trump call with his own message. He stated that Taiwan-U.S. ties are rock solid and that cooperation between Taipei and Washington will continue without interruption. That's a carefully crafted response. Lai is essentially saying, we heard about your phone call, we know what was discussed, and we're not backing down. He's signaling both to his own population and to Washington that Taiwan won't be negotiated away in deals between Beijing and Washington. This three-way dynamic, Beijing, Washington, and Taipei, is becoming increasingly complex. Each capital has its own interests, its own domestic political pressures, and its own red lines. For China, Taiwan represents unfinished business from the Chinese Civil War, a core national interest that Xi Jinping has suggested must be resolved in his lifetime. The Chinese Communist Party's legitimacy is deeply intertwined with the idea of national reunification. Every Chinese leader since Mao Zedong has maintained that Taiwan must eventually return to mainland control. For Xi Jinping specifically, this isn't just policy, it's personal legacy. He has positioned himself as the leader who will complete what previous generations could not. For the United States, Taiwan represents both a democratic partner and a strategic asset. The island sits at a critical geographic choke point. More than half of the world's container ships pass through the Taiwan Strait each year. The island is also home to Taiwan's semiconductor manufacturing company, which produces the majority of the world's most advanced microchips, the kind that power everything from smartphones to fighter jets to artificial intelligence systems. Losing Taiwan to Chinese control wouldn't just be a geopolitical setback for Washington. It would fundamentally alter the global balance of power and potentially cripple American technological superiority. And then there's Taiwan's own perspective, which often gets lost in discussions between Washington and Beijing. This is an island of 23 million people who have built a vibrant democracy. They elect their own leaders. They have a free press. They have protections for human rights that don't exist on the mainland. The vast majority of Taiwanese people, according to every credible poll, have no interest in unification with China under the current political system. For them, this debate isn't about geopolitics or semiconductors or shipping lanes. It's about whether they get to continue living as free people or whether they'll be absorbed into an authoritarian state. So where does this leave us? Trump's approach to China in his second term remains somewhat unpredictable. During his first term, he imposed sweeping tariffs on Chinese goods, leading to a trade war that disrupted global supply chains. He also took a harder line on Taiwan than many of his predecessors, approving multiple arms sales and allowing higher-level official contacts between Washington and Taipei. At the same time, Trump has repeatedly expressed personal admiration for Xi Jinping, calling him a brilliant leader and praising his strength. He's oscillated between confrontation and attempts at deal-making, sometimes within the same week or even the same day. This unpredictability creates both opportunities and dangers. On one hand, it means Beijing can't take American positions for granted. On the other hand, it creates uncertainty for America's allies and partners in the region, countries like Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, and Australia, all of whom have their own concerns about Chinese military expansion, and all of whom are watching closely to see whether Washington will maintain its security commitments. The economic dimension also can't be ignored. The United States and China remain deeply economically intertwined despite years of talk about decoupling. American companies have massive investments in China. Chinese investors hold significant amounts of U.S. debt. Supply chains for everything from pharmaceuticals to electronics still run through both countries. This economic interdependence creates a powerful incentive for both sides to avoid direct conflict, but it also means that any serious crisis over Taiwan would have catastrophic global economic consequences. What yesterday's phone call suggests is that both leaders are trying to establish parameters for their relationship. Xi is making clear that Taiwan is non-negotiable. Trump is maintaining existing U.S. commitments while trying to find common ground on other issues. But here's what makes the situation so precarious. The gap between positions isn't narrowing. China's military has been conducting increasingly aggressive exercises around Taiwan. In recent years, People's Liberation Army aircraft have been making daily incursions into Taiwan's air defense identification zone. Chinese warships regularly patrol the waters around the island. There have been large-scale amphibious assault drills that look to outside observers like rehearsals for an invasion. Beijing has made it clear that it reserves the right to use force if Taiwan moves toward formal independence or if peaceful reunification becomes impossible. The U.S. continues to strengthen its military relationship with the island. Beyond the $11 billion arms package approved in December, the U.S. maintains what's called the Taiwan Relations Act, which commits Washington to providing Taiwan with defensive weapons. American military advisors work with Taiwanese forces. There are regular joint training exercises. And while the U.S. maintains a policy of strategic ambiguity, officially not stating whether it would defend Taiwan militarily, senior American officials have repeatedly suggested that the U.S. would not stand by if China attacked. Taiwan's leadership, meanwhile, shows no interest in moving toward unification with the mainland. President Lai Ching-te, who took office last year, comes from the Democratic Progressive Party, which leans toward Taiwan independence. While he's been careful not to provoke Beijing unnecessarily, he's also been clear that Taiwan's future should be decided by its own people, not dictated by China. This stance is popular domestically, but infuriates Beijing, which sees any assertion of Taiwanese sovereignty as a step toward formal independence. Military analysts have been warning for years that Taiwan represents the most likely flashpoint for a potential conflict between the United States and China, two nuclear-armed superpowers. Yesterday's phone call, with its mix of warnings and warm words, doesn't change that fundamental reality. There is, however, one potentially positive sign: the fact that Trump and Xi are talking directly, that they're planning an in-person meeting in April, suggests both sides see value in keeping channels of communication open. That's not nothing. History shows us that many conflicts begin not because anyone wanted war, but because of miscalculation, misunderstanding, or accidents that spiral out of control. During the Cold War, the U.S. and Soviet Union maintained direct communication lines precisely to prevent such scenarios. The same principle applies here. The planned April meeting in Beijing will be particularly significant. It will be Trump's first visit to China as president in his second term. What gets discussed, what agreements, if any, are reached, what tone the leaders strike, all of this will set the template for U.S.-China relations for years to come. Will they find ways to cooperate on issues like climate change, global health, or nuclear non-proliferation? Will they establish guardrails to prevent military accidents from escalating into crises? Will they make progress on trade issues? Or will the Taiwan question overshadow everything else? Regional dynamics add another layer of complexity. Other countries in Asia are watching this carefully and making their own calculations. Japan has been strengthening its defense capabilities and deepening its security alliance with the U.S., partly out of concern about Taiwan. If Taiwan falls under Chinese control, Japan would suddenly have a hostile power much closer to its shores. South Korea faces a similar calculation. The Philippines, which has its own territorial disputes with China in the South China Sea, has been allowing more U.S. military presence on its territory. Australia has invested in nuclear-powered submarines specifically to counter Chinese naval expansion. All of these countries have economic ties to China that they don't want to jeopardize, but they're also hedging against the possibility of Chinese aggression. As we watch this situation unfold in the coming weeks and months, several things bear watching. Will the U.S. approve additional arms sales to Taiwan? How will China's military posture around the island evolve? What specific agreements, if any, emerge from Trump's planned April visit to Beijing? And perhaps most importantly, how will Taiwan itself navigate these turbulent waters? What's clear is that the Taiwan issue isn't going away. If anything, it's becoming more acute as China grows more powerful and more insistent on what it sees as reunification, while Taiwan grows more confident in its own democratic identity. The window for a peaceful resolution that satisfies all parties may be closing. Some analysts worry that Xi Jinping feels pressure to resolve the Taiwan question while he's still in power, potentially within the next 5 to 10 years. Others believe that as long as economic ties remain strong and communication channels stay open, both sides will continue to manage the situation without resorting to force. The technological dimension adds urgency. Taiwan's dominance in semiconductor manufacturing makes it a critical node in the global economy. Any disruption to Taiwan's chip production, whether from war, blockade, or economic coercion, would send shockwaves through every industry that depends on advanced electronics. This gives the international community a stake in Taiwan's stability that goes beyond traditional geopolitical concerns. It's one reason why countries that might otherwise prefer to stay neutral on the Taiwan question are quietly supporting efforts to diversify chip manufacturing to other locations. There's also the question of how other authoritarian powers are watching this situation. Russia's invasion of Ukraine demonstrated that major powers are willing to use military force to achieve territorial objectives, even in the face of international condemnation and economic sanctions. If China were to successfully take control of Taiwan, it would send a signal to other countries with territorial ambitions that the international order can be changed through force. Conversely, if Taiwan successfully maintains its autonomy in the face of Chinese pressure, it could inspire resistance elsewhere. The human element shouldn't be forgotten either. We're talking about real people whose lives hang in the balance. The 23 million people living in Taiwan didn't choose to be born at the center of a great power competition. They're doctors and teachers and engineers and farmers who want to live their lives, raise their families, and determine their own future. The possibility that their peaceful society could be turned into a battlefield is not an abstract geopolitical scenario. It's an existential threat that shapes every decision their government makes. As we watch this situation unfold in the coming weeks and months, several things bear watching. Will the U.S. approve additional arms sales to Taiwan? How will China's military posture around the island evolve? What specific agreements, if any, emerge from Trump's planned April visit to Beijing? How will Taiwan's government navigate these turbulent waters? And perhaps most importantly, can all three parties, Beijing, Washington, and Taipei, find a way to manage their competing interests without stumbling into a conflict that nobody actually wants, but that could happen anyway through miscalculation or accident? The phone call between Xi and Trump was just one conversation in what will be an ongoing negotiation between two superpowers with fundamentally different visions for the future of the Indo-Pacific region. Xi made his position clear. Taiwan is China's most important concern, and Beijing will not compromise on what it sees as core sovereignty. Trump's response, maintaining warmth while also maintaining American commitments to Taiwan, suggests he's trying to find a balance between engagement and deterrence. Whether that balance can hold is the question that will define this era of great power competition. That's the situation tonight. We'll continue to monitor developments and bring you updates as this story evolves.